West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin has denounced the White House's billionaire tax as divisive because it singles out a specific segment of the population. So, kind of like almost all the wealth in the country being held by 1% of the people, right? A
Hmm.
Wisconsin judge has ruled that lawyers in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial will be required to use terms like rioters and looters, but they will not be allowed to use the word victim in reference to the people he's accused of shooting. The judge will also allow defense attorneys to claim that what did they expect would happen when they left the House being dressed like that. And finally, President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden will be in Europe on Halloween and won't be at the White House to help hand out candy and other treats. The president told reporters that he's disappointed to not celebrate his first Halloween back at the White House after he spent 16 years there as vice president in the 90s, and he's really going to miss filling the stockings and lighting the menorah. The Biden time is now. Welcome to Biden time. Funny, and looking at my little notes there, I wrote the Trump report starts now. Some things, some habits are very hard to die, and I at least knew better than to just read the words I had written in front of myself. Welcome, I'm Christian Bladt. Right over a lot of metrics that people want to point to, in terms of cost of living things. Cost of gasoline is a big one. And I see people asking semi rhetorically all the time. And I think we've done this within the last few months on this show, but I think it's always good to revisit. And they ask all the time, still happy for voting for Biden? And I think most people would probably say what I expect you to say. Scott, do you regret voting for Joe Biden? And do you now wish that you had instead voted for Donald Trump?
No, not in a million
Oh,
years have
okay.
I regretted my choice for voting. That's for sure. Yeah.
In terms of obviously, economic policies differ from president to president, but I don't. I mean, do you get the sense that a lot of what's happening right now is specifically because of decisions that are made by the White House and just Washington in general, with the very slim Democratic rule, or do you feel that we'd be seeing something comparable? And take Donald Trump out of it. It's just sort of, if we had a different president, do you feel like we would be feeling some of the same crunches that we are right now?
Yeah, I do believe that we'd be feeling a lot of the same crunches, like we've talked about before. A president gets too much credit when things go well, and and same thing, or sorry, reverse, gets too much credit when things go bad, but not necessarily enough credit when things go well. It just becomes expected. But I think we're in a very unique situation right now. Um, After a global pandemic that essentially shut the entire global economy down, and you're restarting it back from essentially scratch, and you are trying to get people back in there after like 18 months, a year and a half of trying to get things up and running again, get the bottlenecks and the kinks and the supply chain worked out. There are so many things that are going on that are beyond just the everyday garden variety economical things that we've seen in the past, as well as anything that a president of either party or Congress with the slim majorities they have in either party would realistically be able to do, especially when it comes to the Senate, when you still have that filibuster in place where you have a minority in the Senate, which would be the same thing if Republicans were in control with a thin majority like this. They would have to deal with the Democrats doing the same sort of thing. So it's very challenging when you have such a slim majority. It's one thing if you had, like President Obama did in 2009, you had a Congress that had a lot of people in place there through the 2006 and 2008 elections that really gave them the padding that they needed to have a majority, a solid majority in both houses. So yeah, it's very challenging, and it would be challenging regardless of who was in the White House or who was running Congress. Just with this unique, once in a century type global pandemic that we're dealing with, and that's affecting everybody, and trying to get that back up and running, there's definitely challenges. And as we talked about last week, Democrats in the White House are not the best at messaging either. So, you have that as well, as some people would be able to bulldoze through and message things a little bit different, or try to distract with different messaging. Democrats are not as good at that, in my opinion.
Right. Well, we've got about 3 more years before we're going to end up with making a choice for president, but we're just slightly over a year from the midterm elections. And, I think that I saw a headline that used the term "voters have Biden remorse," and it's saying that Republicans are leading in 85 of these battleground congressional districts, and I think it's very, in terms of talking about the messaging, it is very easy to sort of demonize everything. It's like, are you happy right now? No, you're not. Well, what's wrong? Well, who's in charge? I think that's, it's not, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? It's, are you better off than you were 8 months ago? Is basically sort of what they're leaning on. And, again, we talk about it, there's a lot that can happen in a year, but
Hmm.
what are the tangible things that should be focused on? I mean, look, it's not the foregone conclusion that the Democrats would lose the House. There seem to be a lot of indications that they might, but at that same time, there's plenty of time to sort of make a case, right?
There's plenty of time, and again, this is not out of the ordinary that a president's party is going to lose seats in a midterm. I mean, that's you buck the trend when that doesn't actually happen. And as we talked about last week again too, it happened 20 years ago with George W. Bush, a year after 9/11, and it was a very unique situation. It happened back in the 60s with President Johnson after he had that huge landslide victory in 64. Um, you just don't see it happen that often. So it would actually be more surprising if Democrats picked up seats and kept, the majority after the midterms. However, we're also in a unique situation with a Republican Party that continues to go off the big lie and continues to put themselves under the Trumpism wing, which also, to some degree, is not going to help them out either. So we're in a very unique situation. And it's very easy to talk about polling, a year out of what's going to happen, because again, we saw whenever it kind of goes back to Trumpism is on the ballot, you do see higher turnout. And what will be fascinating is to see what happens next week, which will be somewhat of a barometer with the Virginia and even the New Jersey gubernatorial races. Because, back in 2009, after the sweeping victories of Democrats in '06 and '08, we saw both states pivot back to Republican governors. That's when you got Bob McConnell in Virginia and where you got Chris Christie in New Jersey. And then that set the tone for what happened in 2010 when, as President Obama said, he had a shellacking where he lost 63 seats to Republicans in the 2010 midterms. So it'll be interesting if Democrats can continue to eke out a win in Virginia for the gubernatorial race. And I mean, it looks pretty strong that Phil Murphy will win in New Jersey, but still, um, that'll be a good barometer to kind of see where we're at as we start to head towards 2022. But yeah, there's so many unique situations right now of what's going to happen with COVID, what's going to happen with the supply chain, working that out in the next few months. Is that going to help cool off inflation? Is inflation going to be tempered? What's going to happen with what the Democrats end up passing with their spending bill and what that means for the average Americans, and what's going to come out with this commission? Because, again, Republicans decided not to participate in this bipartisan commission. So now you're going to continue to see potentially very bad news for Republicans in the 2022. And when we see, again, Trumpism on the ballot, we see a high turnout, which we just saw in California in an odd recall election. Essentially, the same exact numbers went back to Governor Gavin Newsom. Even with 500,000 less voters, it was still a very strong turnout and a very strong turnout against the GOP in an off year, even though California is very Democratic. You can see what's going to happen there. So yeah, and the next barometer will be next Tuesday, and we'll see how those states trend in Virginia, New Jersey, and then from there, we'll have a better idea of what we're looking at as we head into the new year.
Yeah, and we have the expectation of being around at pretty much this time next Wednesday, and we'll have that to look at. Since you brought it up, I wanted to spend a moment on the Democratic governor's race. The fact that Terry McAuliffe is running there, and it seemed like he had President Biden, and we'll talk a little bit about him in a bit, but he had him out there, and the video is, of course, circulating of Terry McAuliffe dancing on stage, and he said that you never want to see him doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
so, of course, anybody who doesn't want him or doesn't want there to be another Democratic governor are using this as the opportunity to point out, like, this guy must be desperate because he's dancing. And let's be honest, it's not a great dance. So I'll see if I
Yeah.
find it. I know where it is. I just have to look for it. But not as a literal barometer, but what's your sense on that race? I mean, everything I see, it seems like it's neck and neck. And in all honesty, the majority of the people that I know in DC, Maryland, Virginia are all Republicans. So the ones that I follow on Twitter are giving me the impression that he doesn't have a chance. But more objectively, what do you think it is about what's going on out there, in that Virginia governor's race?
Well, the Virginia race, Youngkin, who's the Republican who's running, is trying to thread that needle of not being the extreme Trumpist candidate while also playing into local issues of education and trying to get, parents and local races as an entity to say, hey, we're going to be hands off with critical race theory, with the masking mandates, and all those other things right now. He's trying to really push it on the local level in education. As we've seen, it's become contentious all across the country at local school board meetings and other things. So he's trying to angle it that way and try to get the moderate voters, not just the rural and the southwestern part of the state of Virginia, which is hugely Republican, but trying to get more of those moderate voters and more of those suburban women voters that were lost to the Republicans over the past couple election cycles in 2018 and 2020. Those moderate Republican suburban women went heavily for the Democrats. So he's trying to bring some of those voters back into the fold. And he's hoping that if he can run up the score there, that he'll be able to eke out a win in Virginia. But a lot of people keep saying that Virginia is a purple state, but in a lot of ways it is not anymore. It is a blue state. It's much like California. There's a huge population of Republican and rural and conservative voters in California, but they're just always outnumbered by the more populous areas of the state. And that's the same thing with Virginia. The northern part of the state is where all the population is, and where all the people that work in DC and Alexandria and all those northern uh, Virginia suburbs of DC are hugely Democratic, and that's where the population is. And if those voters come out and vote in huge numbers, it's just, again, the numbers are too much on the Democratic side um, to be able to get a victory for Youngkin. Terry McAuliffe has a lot of baggage as well, and he comes from the Clinton years. He was governor previously. The thing that's unique about Virginia is you can't run for reelection consecutively, so you're only up for a 4-year term, and then you have to leave, and then you can come back and run again. And that's exactly what happened here. He was governor in the mid-teens, had to step away, and now is running again. So it's a kind of an odd situation in Virginia that's not like really any other states. You have a few in New England that do every 2 years. But in this case, you can't be a governor for consecutive terms. So he was previously governor, coming back again for part two. I guess you could say it could be the same thing if Trump attempts to run again, just the non consecutive nature of it. But we'll see if the local issues of education are going to pull some of those moderate Republican women who uh, left the party for the Democrats the past two cycles, if they'll come home again, or if you'll still have a strong enough Democratic turnout that'll be scared enough of a Trump light type candidate taking over Virginia to make sure that they get out and vote. And that's what will be interesting to see barometer wise how that's going to play out.
Yeah, and look, it's a great point in terms of the state as a whole in Virginia. Obviously, I think people think of, when you think of Virginia, you think of some of the, well, it's the more rural areas, but also even like Richmond, I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
so different than Northern Virginia, right up by
Mm-hmm.
DC. I mean, it's comparable really to New York, which, I grew up in the suburbs, like 45 miles northwest of New York, and it was not the bluest part of the state, let's say, but
Mm-hmm.
there's so many people concentrated in the metropolitan areas in states like that. It doesn't matter that there are so many, other counties that are so red. And so I think it'll be interesting to see. And yeah, I mean, and then, Terry McAuliffe's sort of, and look, we talk about, we talk about term limits all the time on here. One seems like very short, but then to be able to do it non-consecutive, it's like, well, then why are you bothering?
Mhm.
I think president 8 years, that seems about right, and I think that for the Senate and the House, some kind of limits would be good too. But boy, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you have 4 years where you don't have to, start running for reelection after 3 years, maybe you can get a lot done. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, what will it tell you if McAuliffe doesn't win? Will it be anecdotal? Will it really highlight those issues for moderates and conservatives there in that state, or will it be indicative of something more, perhaps?
No, I think it will be a big flashing red warning sign, and for Democrats going into 2022, uh, because of what we saw in 2009 when Bob McConnell had won
Right.
in gubernatorial after Virginia went blue in the presidential race in 2008 for the first time since LBJ's landslide in '64. So when you saw that happen after a year later, after Virginia finally had flipped blue for the first time, that was a big warning sign of what was to come in 2010 of sort of the national temperature. So yes, it will absolutely be a big test for Democrats and a big warning sign of the national party, if Youngkin is able to squeak out a win in Virginia. I think it's a lot less likely that Phil Murphy will lose in New Jersey. I think New Jersey has just trended a lot more into the Democratic column lately. It's New Jersey's interesting. It has gone for Democrats at the presidential level and has Democratic senators, but has not voted for Republican for president since George H.W. Bush in '88. But a unique anecdote to New Jersey is they generally have not given two terms to Democratic governors in a really long, long, long time. So Phil Murphy's kind of up against the weird kind of quirky nature of New Jersey statewide politics, but I do think that New Jersey shifted enough in a Democratic column now, as we've seen the changes across the board nationwide. The split ticket type of thing is just kind of a quaint thing of the past now. You don't see it like you used to, where you might vote for a Democratic senator in your state and vote for Republican for president, or vote for Republican governor and vote for Democrats at the national level. You don't see that as much anymore. So that's why I feel more likelihood it is Phil Murphy's going to get that second term. But it is kind of a unique quirk in New Jersey politics that they've been given two terms to Republican governors through the years that are moderate, but not to Democrats. So, but again, I think he's definitely more in the safe zone if I had to put it down a bet or something. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because the Republican governors in New Jersey, two of the most high profile in the last couple decades are Christy Todd Whitman and
Hmm.
Chris Christie. Sorry, I was just like, wait, they both have Christie in there, and
Yeah.
it threw me off
Threw you
for a
off.
second. I'm like, wait a minute, am I saying the wrong name? So honestly, they just like Christie's. No, but in all
Yeah,
honesty, I
exactly.
mean, they were huge. Both of them were hugely popular. I mean, I lived in bordering states,
Hmm. Hmm.
during a lot of that time. And yeah, so I think it is a little bit harder to to know which way they're going to go. But I think that people in New Jersey are typically happy at the moment. If he had been running for reelection last year, I think people weren't so happy with Phil Murphy because they felt like some of their state restrictions for COVID were stricter than New York, and I think that, but and look, he was ahead of the pack in terms of when it came to vaccines. I remember he felt like smokers were high risk, and I think that it was an interesting point. So I don't know. I think
Hmm.
so. Look, he's got the Newport unfiltered vote, and that's really what matters. So I think that that's why he made sure that they're still around. In terms
Absolutely.
of yeah, so there's a lot of talk about this billionaire tax. I had a joke about it at the top of the show as well.
Hmm.
And the idea is that basically 700 of the richest Americans would pay for this $2 trillion spending bill. And the GOP is, of course, bucking against that. with one elected official even asking if it's constitutional. When I hear stuff like this, I do agree that you're just highlighting, you're targeting people, you're trying to punish them for being successful. But I think that the problem we always get to with these sort of issues is these 700 people. If you were to break it down, and I'm not that much of a numbers guy where I would have this, they probably don't pay enough in taxes in terms of, legal reasons, a lot
Hmm.
of breaks that are given. And I think if those kinds of breaks didn't exist and you had these sort of, you had these people paying, whatever the fair share is in their respective states, you wouldn't need to do something like this. So I don't know, when you hear of this plan, Scott, what is your first thought of, the 700 richest people, seeing if they've got collectively $2 trillion in their couch cushions?
I mean, look, it is the tale as old as time here, and we always talk about soaking the rich, and California is famous for doing that. Uh, but at the end of the day, talking about constitutionality, I think that would be a hard thing to say, only because in the Constitution it is very generic about how the Congress has the right to levy taxes. Um, I do agree that some of these loopholes have allowed um, a lot of the ultra rich to avoid paying their fair share of taxes, and are able to, how they kind of thrive as they borrow against their assets, and so they're not really ever tapping into their full income, and are able to get tax breaks that way. And I get it. There's always the people that are going to say, "Look, I earn this money. I don't want to have to pay more in taxes." But also, if you're a billionaire, what you're paying in taxes, what you're going to be quite fine and comfortable with the amount that they're asking uh, you to be taxed. So I think if you're in that enviable position, you don't have to still worry about money if your taxes are going to go up a bit, and you're part of the collective good about taking what you've succeeded with and helping out. Continue, because again, at the end of the day, like I said, we talked about this months ago when we were talking about being able to upgrade the infrastructure. If you own a business, you want your infrastructure to be upgraded. It'll help you as a business owner at the end of the day to have good internet for everybody, that's accessible to everybody, that's more customers for you. You want to be able to have a good electrical supply to be able to do the jobs that you're going to be doing. You want to have good roads and transportation systems and grids to be able to get your product to where it needs to go in a timely manner. So part of this is also just knowing that at the end of the day, you're going to be benefiting your company if you have a healthy workforce that has access to good healthcare, if you have upgraded infrastructure to where you can get what you need and where you can get into your office or where you need to go. So those type of things really do make a difference that people tend to forget, is that yes, the government wastes, but I work with budgets and stuff, and I see how much companies waste money too, and it does happen, and it is difficult. Where when it's not your money, you're like, ah, okay, it's a couple $1,000s, whatever, and we're not, we're basically wasting the money. It does happen. It happens everywhere, and business owners know that it happens. But if you're doing your fair share in taxes, and if you were able to get rid of those loopholes, then I agree, then you wouldn't necessarily need to be soaking the rich, and that you'd be able to still be able to contribute, and at the end of the day, what's going to be helping you out as a business owner, to be able to get your product out there as well. So
Yeah, no, I think that I don't know. I mean, I think I can understand the argument, sort of like we're both saying, is that I can understand the argument that they're unfairly being targeted, but it's not like you want to the pass the buck to people who are already, paying enough in taxes. It's sort of like figure out a way to do that. But I don't know. I mean, I think that it's tough because anything that there's any pushback on, this very, very slim majority that I referenced earlier, it is so hard to get everything done. And, Joe Manchin had comments earlier in the week, this idea that, not a day goes by that somebody doesn't try and get him to become a Republican, and honestly, it has to be very tempting to him, because of the fact that it throws off the entire Senate you get one more Republican, if you were. So I think that while it has to be frustrating for the rest of the Democratic Party that, he isn't just on board with everything that they want to do, he still believes in himself as a Democrat because, it seems like he has enough problems with Republicans that he doesn't consider himself one. But the power play behind the scenes, there must be, it'd be something like, right out of the West Wing, trying to, it's like, but think about all the power you can have. And, I don't know. So it's impressive to think about, not the fact that people are asking him, but the fact that he's consistently saying no. You know what I mean, Scott?
I mean, 100%. He does have way more power. He's probably loving this moment in time because he
Yeah.
has more power than he's ever had. But you're absolutely right. As much as it can be very frustrating to see him uh, do the things that he's doing, um, you're right. He could very easily take the easy route out and become a very moderate Republican in the state of West Virginia. I mean, Governor Jim Justice did that. He was actually elected
Yeah.
as a Democrat in West Virginia and then switched his party affiliation. And you've seen that in the past. Our own inspector went from Republican to Democrat in Pennsylvania as a senator. That would be the closest, most recent kind of analog. But absolutely, I mean, he could. And but again, he's built his entire career as a Democrat and has been able to be successful in West Virginia as a Democrat and continuously wins elections by a fair amount. And he was a two-term, very popular governor there before he ran for the Senate. And he's one of those rare politicians that can win, and he understands where his state's coming from. And we've talked about this too. He's not going to be the same as a senator from California as far as the level of the type of Democrat he is. And the majority of Democrats across the country still are moderate to even a little bit right in the conservative side. There's not as many on the extreme kind of left side. So that's, it is fascinating, but you're right. He could have easily switched already and he hasn't. So there is a reason behind that, as frustrating as it can be. But
Yeah.
yeah, and he does have a lot of power, and I'm sure there probably are people that are saying, "Hey, just switch over; it'll be a lot easier." And I'm sure
You,
there's some
you,
Democrats too, like we're done with it. Just
you think Mitch McConnell's office has reached out? You think that there's any chance that he might have been like, "Let's go have lunch"? It's all right. I'm
yeah,
buying.
right.
Don't worry about it. Well, President Biden is heading off to Rome for the G20, and then he'll be in Glasgow for a climate summit. And, one of the things that this administration ran on, I was reading an NPR article about this, that, they campaigned on this idea that they would restore respect for us internationally and sort of get our alliances back in order. But it is a time where it is very easy to see that President Biden not particularly popular at home at the moment, but also other countries have to still feel. I mean, they're going to have a variety of things to say about the Afghanistan withdrawal. And just how much do you want to throw your lot in with a guy that you don't even know if he can get anything done? I mean, so how do you feel like he's going to be received at, the G20? I feel like a little easier, but, I mean, there hasn't really been a lot of climate headway, as Tamara has pointed out, over the last few weeks. That's something that she's been particularly disappointed in from the Biden White House. But how do you feel like this big European, this National Lampoon's European vacation is going to go for him?
Yeah, I mean, look, I won't put all the blame on the climate issues on the Biden White House because
Sure, no, of
again, we
course,
have
yeah.
Joe Manchin and we have folks in the Senate that are actively pushing back on some of these details. Yeah, I believe that it is a challenge, and I think part of the challenge uh, is the fact that the rest of the world sees just these pendulum swings between one extreme to the other instead of in the past where we kind of had our consistency between Republican and Democratic administrations of like these are the things that we're gonna unilaterally do as Americans and as consistent policy that has now been thrown by the wayside, and now you start seeing such extreme movements. Kind of started when Obama took over after Bush, and then we see it whiplash again when Trump takes over, and then we see it whiplash again when Biden takes over, and then if a Republican takes over again in 4 to 8 years, the likelihood is we're going to see these extreme shifts continue to happen because the parties are no longer as close to having that middle ground like they used to, and now you have more of the extreme folks on either side. So you're seeing that, and so it makes it hard for the rest of the world to fully trust America to be the leader now because they're wondering if they enter into an agreement, if in 48 years it's going to be taken away or changed, and now you're back to the drawing board again. So it is a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge when they see that the infighting with Democrats to be able to just to get something signed has been a challenge. So absolutely, Biden's going to have to go in and really sweet sell the deal and just say, that him and the fellow Democrats are on board on getting these things done. And I still think at the end of the day, though, world leaders are a lot happier to have at least more consistency and a little bit better of a temperament having Biden in the White House as opposed to Trump. So whatever their misgivings are, it's more of a general than it is on having a second Trump term. So, but that's the biggest issue is just the whiplash back and forth that we didn't normally used to have in the past between administrations. So
Right.
that is a
And if you
challenge
want to
now.
talk about the whiplash, I mean, you and I are both on record as we feel it is very unlikely to happen, but it is not impossible that in just a few short years, Donald Trump would be back making the rounds again. So it's
Hmm.
almost like you're like, well, I gotta kind of stay sort of in a spot where I'm able to deal with that again. And even if it's not him, it could be someone from that mold.
Hmm.
The obviously there are no guarantees that there wouldn't be a Republican in the White House in 3 years. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see as things react. Sort of as we see the reactions is really what I meant to say from some of the other leaders around the world, and we'll see that over the course of the next week. And I was just one final thought on Joe Manchin. I just realized I was just thinking about like, it's funny because like a week from now, we could be talking about like, oh, well, he did actually become a Republican, so it's like everything we've said be like, yeah, but eventually, you dangle the right carrot at some point. There's been a lot of, we've had a lot of continued talk about January 6th, and John Dean of Watergate fame has said Merrick Garland should name a special counsel to probe just who organized January 6th. We're getting to see some more because it's literally what we've talked about the last few weeks, Scott, that the lower level people who aren't elected officials, who don't necessarily have the party keeping a lawyer on retainer to help them, are being very forthright, and they're like, oh yeah, no, these are all people who we feel like we had easy access to talk about this. And you have President Biden again blocking former President Trump, trying to keep as many of the documents from being made public. And we talked about it last week, the ruling that they can charge Steve Bannon with contempt of court, whether or not that would happen. But is another special counsel really going to help with this? I mean, I think that John Dean definitely having the right, I don't know, he in terms of a logical approach to it, but from where we are at this point, it's already almost 10 months later. I guess it's almost 11 months later, really.
Hmm.
How much is it going to help to like, let's have another special counsel and another hearing and all of that? Do you think it will actually help?
I mean, I do, depending on the setup and how politically charged it is. Look, you can go back and talk about political motivations all day long because we just have to look to Benghazi. And I found it interesting that Condoleezza Rice had said something the other day about how they should put that aside, which is kind of ironic coming from her when Benghazi was such a big thing and she supported having multiple hearings on that. So it was kind of a shame that she put herself in that position because now she politicized herself by saying that we shouldn't be focused on January 6th anymore. But on the other hand, it was fine to continue to have multiple hearings and investigations into Benghazi. So yeah, I do believe that depending on how it's set up, it could be beneficial if it's not as politically charged or partisan. because what Republicans will do is, again, they're better at messaging than Democrats in a lot of ways. They'll come back and continue to say this was a witch hunt, whatever comes from this with the commission with Congress and the Democrats. It's still going to be, you're going to have people on the Republican side that are just going to say, look, it was just a partisan witch hunt. And Trump's tactic, what he always does, and what's kept him out of prison, basically, and other problems, is that he pushes the clock and sues and sues and sues and tries to run the clock out on certain things. And that's what he's doing here. His hope is that, or Bannon's hope too, is that they'll run the clock out with this contempt until Republicans, hopefully, in their opinion, would win in 2022 and end this investigation, and therefore he wouldn't be, in contempt and potentially go to prison. So it is important because just for optics wise, and maybe to be able to have a little more under the radar with a commission that can really look into everything, because clearly there are a lot of things that occurred that day that we're still not privy to, and I'm sure that the hearings right now are uncovering a lot of stuff, and we do have a lot of former Trump officials that are voluntarily testifying to this commission right now, and so things are going to start coming out. And the thing is that they will continue to come out as we get into the election year. So having this separate thing could be beneficial, um, and I think it's very important being in a national situation that comes down to voting and this attempted, what some people are calling an attempted coup, um, is taken care of, and hopefully that it never happens again, because otherwise you're opening the door for future possibilities that may not work in the favor they're supposed to, and democracy may not be upheld in the future.
Right, exactly. And I think that, the little bits that we continue to hear, about the meeting at the Willard Hotel on January 5th, and,
Hmm.
the access that some members of the House may have provided, that we've heard since really the day of and the day after, some of the tours that were given, and, some of that stuff that was all, going on at that point. And I feel like we're going to get only more of that. So a federal judge in Texas has thrown out this petition by some Southwest airline pilots against the White House's vaccine mandate. The way it stands is that federal workers and government contractors, and that it does include major U.S. commercial airlines, must be vaccinated by December 8th. But you do have a number of business groups that are trying to be like, well, can we kind of kick that to after the holidays? I can see why the airline industry would be particularly concerned about losing a huge percentage of their workforce at the busiest time of the year. I guess again, it also gives them leverage, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's been so much time given that, I was surprised in reading about this earlier that they have until December 8th, just because of how long ago we heard about this. How tricky is this for one, the White House, but also for Democrats who support this idea of having, this mandate that does indeed include airline pilots?
Yeah, I mean, my dad's actually retiring at the end of the year from being a pilot, and these type of stories are always of interest to me. And it is true. You do have that conundrum where you have the upcoming travel season, and airlines have still struggled to get the elusive business travelers back and other people, and they know that they're at their peak of travel season. And there is a concern that you could lose a lot of pilots before the end of the year, and you're going to struggle to be able to keep those flights going um, during a very difficult time. So I understand the airline's perspective. However, like you said, they've had a lot of time. It's just that it was an odd day to extend to if you were going to make that extension, because they did kind of make that extension originally. So why, the mandate wasn't just pushed till January 2nd or something like that, just to at least give people, even if it's like they have to be tested or uh, whatever the case is. And I think there is a balance of being able to do that, saying either you have to have testing requirements if you're still not fully vaccinated, but this is the drop dead deadline. And then that gives pilots and other folks the opportunity to work to the end of the year and do what they need to do, pay those holiday bills like the rest of us, and then ride off into the sunset if that's what they choose to do, if they don't want to be involved. So I do think it is a tricky time period because of the uptick in travel. They've been given plenty of time. However, if you're just talking about a couple weeks, if they had at least a compromise to say everyone has to be tested before they can get on and work, then I could see that being a compromise. But if you continue to keep pushing it, then what's going to happen January 2nd? We're like, well, can we just wait until after spring break? So when does
Yeah,
that
right,
end? So
right.
if you
The
keep giving
Valentine's Day
extensions,
travel, spring
right?
break, and then before you know it,
And then
Easter, and
summer, and then it's the
yeah,
summer travel season. So there is
right,
that fear of like, then where are you going? Are you going to continue to keep pushing it? Because they're like,
yeah.
well, so I kind of can very much see both sides of it, especially after the travel industry was just walloped last year. But at the other side, like you said, they've had plenty enough time. They knew this was happening, and so there really is not an excuse anymore. And that the people that were going to be vaccinated should already be vaccinated. And if not, then they can find employment elsewhere.
Yeah, just a couple more things I wanted to touch on before we go. I was reading about it, and it's something we've talked about periodically on the show. I believe when we've had our friend Al on, this is something that's interesting to him in terms of this universal basic income. I was reading that Los Angeles is going to pay $1,000 a month to 3,000 families that are living in poverty. Specifically, they seem to be impacted by the pandemic. So here in Los Angeles, the city council is going to spend $40 million on this program when they were originally going to spend $6 million. Obviously, $1,000 a month when you're living below the poverty line. I can imagine it makes a tremendous impact, but it's also the question the rest of us might have is like, oh, only $1,000. But what do you think this could say nationally if if you were able to see some favorable results? I mean, like at first I thought it was $1,000 a week, which again, that's not that you can live off $1,000 a week in Los Angeles if you're a family of, well, even two, but especially a family of
Right.
four. But I mean, it's really just like an extra $1,000 a month. This isn't really like in place of. What do you think? Is it enough that it'll actually give you results where you can see if it works, or is it like, look, you're just giving them $1,000 a month? Like, how much is this really going to change?
Well, I think we've seen some things when they increased the unemployment assistance during COVID, and the thought is, oh, people are just going to waste it on booze and other things that are not necessary. But what you found is that the majority of folks were actually using it for things that they needed, like being able to pay the rent, being able to pay the grocery bills, being able to pay those bills, and being able to help support and pay for childcare. So definitely, it's it's definitely something that you can see the positivity out of it. And like we talked about, there is no paid child leave right now in the nation. And daycare costs are a huge burden on most working families. So when you do have this money that's given out in that sense, there is a chance it's going to be used for those type of things. And as we've talked about too, it gets people back out and working, which to me is a Republican type mantra of saying, okay, we want people out there working. Um, like people are not using this money for extravagant things and travel and buying fancy cocktails. I mean, that's just not what the money would be used for. It would literally be used for the things that people need to survive and thrive. And that's what we saw with the COVID, unemployment assistance over the past year. It's just tricky when you start getting into that with no strings attached and how much money and pegged to. Um, you do get into some of those challenges as well of like, okay, how does that work? And then now is that everybody? Because you saw also a lot of the assistance that went with the stimulus money didn't go to the higher earners, which to some degree is kind of unfair as well. Just because you're a higher earner, I guess it kind of goes back to the billionaire tax. Like, why are higher earners excluded from the stimulus money as well every single time? So there are definitely a lot of issues that would have to be sorted out, and I think these pilot programs are helpful to be able to see how it really does work in the real world instead of just guessing on a chart or data, to really see how it's going to work out. But it is a very, very tricky, not just politically and contentiously, but just in general, like what this money is being used for, and is it worth just doling out money with no strings attached, and how much. So there's a lot of things that'll be sorted out, and we'll see how this works. I mean, I know they did something like this in Sacramento, so it'll be interesting. But there's a lot to kind of figure out there.
Yeah, no, I think that it will sort of give some anecdotal evidence, and I guess, it's more that, okay, does it work enough that you could try to do $1,000 a week instead, and on what scale? I don't think that the federal government is likely to do anything with this anytime soon, but
No.
I think it's certainly something that we can certainly take a look at. From the significant to the opposite of it, I feel like I want to just end on sort of the lighter note, and obviously we are, if not anything but the fashion police here at Biden time. Kristen Sinema getting a lot of attention for appearing on the Senate floor in a jean vest and sneakers. And I really wish Tamara was here for this, because obviously, if she's on TikTok, she is a little bit more in touch with what is appropriate decor. So there was, of course, some funny reactions to it. There was a tweet that said, "What does she think this is, a rodeo?" with a colorful expletive in the midst of it. What do you think about showing up on the Senate floor? Where I feel in the 200 and 45-year history of our country, we've never once had a casual Friday, in the Senate. Should there be, some kind of decorum? I mean, NBA teams, some NBA teams aren't allowed to dress like this when they travel. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
They have to, there's rules in terms of how you're supposed to appear. And what do you think about this, Scott?
I mean, to be honest, there's much bigger issues to worry about than what
Oh,
she
yeah,
wore. I mean,
totally.
let's just be completely honest. Look, the casualization of wardrobe has increased over the past 40, 50 years. I mean, look, at one point, people used to wear suits and ties and their fanciest dresses and everything to football games and sporting events and
Oh,
traveling
yeah,
on
yeah. No, you
airplanes.
look at
And
a World Series game from the '50s. Everybody's got hats. All the men have hats
right.
on, and women are like dressed like they would for church. Yeah, no, I
And
agree. Yeah,
not ball caps, and people used to wear their fancy clothes to the beach even. I mean, so we've seen this. This is not a new thing. Granted, yes, you could say there's a certain level of respect and decorum that you would wear when you're on the Senate floor. I don't know if this was like if this was her casually popping in for something like at the office,
right.
like
And
some
it's
people do,
also
like when
not
you
one
run
of
in
those
and then
sessions at like 2 in the morning that somebody has to preside over, and it just happened to be. Yeah, yeah. No, it's. I don't believe it's that, but yeah, I
yeah,
know
I
what you're
don't know
saying.
what the situation was. She popping into
Sure.
the office because she just needs to grab some paperwork. What was the what was the intention that day? Was she just coming in and out? But yeah, I agree. There is a certain level of decorum, but I also am like there's way more important things. Like she needs to vote for the things that she was elected to vote for. She was elected as a Democrat, and I've had a lot of folks say, "Oh, she was elected to who she was, but she used to be pretty far to the left, and she's tacked
Yeah.
back to the middle." And yes, I get Arizona is a battleground state and is not a blue state as much as like a place like Virginia is, or is not as much of a red state as West Virginia is. But the point of the matter is, she was elected as a Democrat, and she should be putting the priorities of what her Democratic majority want. And we saw in the last election that not only did Mark Kelly win the other Senate seat, but Joe Biden
Right.
won the state of Arizona as well. So that should be able to give her the idea of the direction the state is going in. And that to me is more important, is like, what is she doing for Arizonans and what is she doing for the nation at large in her voting and whatever strategies than what she's wearing? Because it's sad to say, but to some degree, a lot of the casualization has already happened. And even in corporate America, you're not seeing the same thing where people wearing suits and ties and their fanciest outfits
Yeah.
to work every day anymore, unless you're at a law firm or bank or high level executive. You're just not anymore. And so it's already occurred. And so yes, this is, I get it. There should be some decorum, but also what was going on that day to why she was dressed the way she was, because clearly she felt that wherever she was dressed was completely fine for whatever she was doing that day.
Right. Well, the whole reason I brought it up is because I wanted to pose this question to you, Scott. How do you feel like you would react if you saw later today Mitch McConnell show up on the floor of the Senate in cut off jean shorts and flip flops?
I think I'd just be scared because I don't think anyone wants to see Mitch McConnell's legs or feet.
That's really what I thought. Yeah.
But beyond that, again, I don't care as
Yeah.
much of like, what is he voting on? What is he doing to, move the country forward? And that's what I care about more than anything else, than how you're dressed. I mean,
Yeah.
but yeah, granted, I could see me shut up that way. I'd be like,
I
okay.
mean, if I had to guess, he'd be voting to like outlaw Halloween or something. If I just had to guess. Probably something like that too. It's like, what'll make the largest number of children cry? That's
right,
the one I want. Yeah.
Like we can't have socialism of giving out free candy to people and to kids anymore. That should be outlawed. No socialism, and no socialism at Christmas either. No gifts from Santa Claus.
No, exactly. Yeah.
That's socialism.
Yeah, it's gonna teach kids to not have to work for themselves if they just know that Santa's gonna bring them what it is that they want.
Whatever they want, right?
Scott, next week we will have it's not a big election day, but I think there's a lot of interest around that Virginia race, and still some interest about New Jersey, but we'll certainly have something to talk about then, and we'll be back I believe next Wednesday at the same time of 11 a.m. And as Storage Yard Resident pointed out in the chat as we were getting started, the time does change a lot. There's a lot to juggle for all of us, as evidenced by the fact that it's very rarely the three of us right now. And I've got an almost 4-year-old home right now as we're doing this. So there's a lot to juggle, but she did make this picture for me. So I think that's very important. In any case, we will be back next week and we'll talk about that. Thanks to everybody who watched live. And if you're watching the archive version, please leave your thoughts in the comments. And Scott, if people want to keep in touch with you, where can they go to do that?
They can just go right there to SMan80.
Yep. And you can find me. And you can find me at Christian DMZ. All right. Thanks again. And we'll see everybody next week.
Bye.
Bye.